So let's raise the big questions on the inequality debate. Are the poor getting poorer in this country? Is inequality rising or falling? Is poverty in India being wrongly projected? Some of the questions we'll raise. Amitabh Behar is CEO of Oxfam India, which has brought out that inequality report. Nilesh Shah is member of the Prime Minister's Economic Council. Dr. Arun Kumar, senior economist and a critic, I may say, of the Modi government. Let me come to Amitabh Behar first from Oxfam. I want to understand that your report every year seems to suggest inequality is widening, and a lot of critics of your report are contrasting it with the IMF report, which actually says extreme poverty has come down because of government welfare schemes like free ration. That you are looking at only concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, but what you are not seeing is also that poverty, according to the IMF report, has actually come down. How do you respond?
Thank you, Rajdeep, for inviting me. And let me say that, this report is about the growing inequality. And you have cited some figures, but let me also just talk of one more figure. And I think it's critical. If you look at the last 1 decade, and first let me quote the global data, 50% of the new wealth created actually went to the top 1%. In the last 2 years of the pandemic, 2/3 of this newly created wealth went to the top 1%. And it's not very different for India. 40% of this wealth went to the top 1%, whereas the bottom 50% got only 3%. So I think it's important to recognize that inequality has risen, and it is something that we can see through data and also in our day-to-day interactions in the world. So I think it's very important to actually look at the causes of inequality. Our report is to say that inequality is growing and we need to directly address the question of inequality. That's the central message, that we cannot do away, we cannot look away and say that inequality is a non-issue. We need to focus on inequality, and there are ways of addressing it. This is something which is not good for the future of this country.
But you are admitting that this is A, not an India problem, that this is a global issue at the moment of rising inequalities. It's not just specific to India. And B, somewhere you are also, you claim that this has widened during the COVID pandemic. Am I correct?
Sure. So why would you say I admit? The report clearly says it's a global phenomena, but in India you see it far more accentuated. And yes, again, the pandemic has worsened the situation, but inequality has been growing over the last few decades. So as in there are several reports. Look at what Thomas Piketty says, that in India you saw inequality actually decline till the 80s, and then you see a sharp increase in inequality. So it is
but you're also
not just
seeing
an Oxfam
I'm
report.
sorry
You
to
have the
intervene, but you're also
lab,
but there are enough reports, Amitabh, which are also saying that the middle class, those consumer middle class, has also grown post the 1990s. So there are conflicting reports. As I said, there's an IMF report which says extreme poverty is down. There have been previous reports which have claimed the middle class incomes are rising. So, your report versus the others, is it because different methodologies are used?
At least on Rajdeep, just on the poverty, let me just say that at least till 12-13, we did get regular figures on poverty. In the last few years, we have not got reports on the poverty numbers. I think it would be very, very helpful if we start getting those numbers. But if you even look at, say, the multidimensional poverty that came out, we are still talking of 25 to 30% of people living below the poverty line. Look at what happened during the pandemic. And since then, almost 80 crore people are actually benefiting, surviving from the food scheme of the government. Look at what happened during the pandemic. Majority of the country's population was actually surviving on NREGA. So these are very, very serious indicators, and the question is, on the other hand, while people are suffering, they're living in debt, there's high unemployment, on the other hand, you have this number of billionaires growing dramatically.
But
As you said, from 102 billionaires it's become 166. So I think the question is that there is wealth being generated, and if you don't redistribute this wealth, then I think the huge deficits of, say, education, huge deficits of health are not going to be addressed. The question is, how do we redistribute our wealth to ensure a life of dignity for all? I think that's the real question, instead of really getting into other questions.
This is an age-old problem. This is not let's be fair, it's not a problem just of 2023. Ensuring an equitable distribution of wealth has been a problem that has existed for years. But Nilesh Shah, the point that the Oxfam report makes is that the gap, they seem to suggest, is only widening. The concentration of wealth with the emergence of more billionaires, and many will say you need wealth creators. But if there is concentration of wealth, then it widens the inequalities that exist. I mean, 1% or 21 billionaires of India accounting for the same wealth of 70 crore Indians. How do you respond?
So Rajdeep, clearly inequality is there. Now whether it is widened, reduced, but inequality is there. How do we reduce inequality? If we look at the savings pattern of the rich versus poor, undoubtedly rich are saving more and poor are saving less. So one way is to increase overall income so that poor can also save more. But the real challenge for us is investment of that savings. The poor by and large are investing in cash, in gold, in chit fund and nidhis. You will be surprised to know, Rajdeep, that 1.5 crore Indians have lost 1,80,000 crore in collective investment scheme, from PSCL to EMU to Tickwood. These are the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. They are lured of overnight doubling of money and stuff like that, and they end up losing their capital. So we have to focus on providing savings option to bottom of the pyramid. We created Jan Dhan, everyone got a bank account. Let's create a Jan Nivesh Yojana so that bottom of the pyramid can also compound their wealth at the same level as the rich of the India.
Okay, let me try and get Arun Kumar to explain why is it Surjit Bhalla's report, IMF's report says actually extreme poverty has declined, that the Modi government has consciously worked at welfare schemes that provide free ration, for example, versus Oxfam's report which says wealth inequalities are widening and the poor in a way are getting poorer in comparison to the rich who seem to get more affluent.
So, Rajdeep, there are three different kinds of inequalities that exist that are measured. First is the inequality in consumption, second is the inequality in income, and third is the inequality in wealth. What the Oxfam report primarily focuses on is the disparity in wealth. And you must understand that, the consumption inequality is less, and I think what Surjit Bhalla and so on are doing is the consumption inequality, not the income or the wealth inequality as far as I understand. The income inequality, unfortunately, the data is not available. It has to be assessed in a different way. And the wealth inequality also does not take into account fully the actual inequality because, it's largely based on financial holdings of stock market or financial assets and so on, but doesn't take into account the black economy, doesn't take into account the of the real estate sector and the funds that are held abroad. So actually the Oxfam report understates the wealth inequality. The wealth inequality is much larger than what the Oxfam report reports. So in a sense, what we need to worry about is that what's happening at the bottom, as Nilesh Shah correctly points out, and I'd like to point to the eShram portal on which 28 crore people have registered from the unorganized sector, and 94% of them say that they are earning less than 10,000 rupees per month. And if you look at the World Bank latest poverty line, it's $2.15 per day per person, and that translates to 13,000 rupees per month per person. So in other words, all these 94% people in the unorganized sector who are saying that they are earning less than 10,000 rupees, they are poor. So if you go by that, then you find that the report that Sujit Bhalla and company have given is not quite accurate, because they're not really taking into account the actual consumption pattern in the economy. So while it's correct that the government giving 5 kilo of ration and earlier 10 kilo of ration did help the poor people, because after all, you know, they were not able to purchase enough food, and therefore government definitely helped in that, and that definitely you know, helped in the reduction of the extreme poverty. But the poor don't spend only on food, they also need other things, and that's where I think the multidimensional poverty still is much higher than what the Sujit Bhalla and the IMF report
Let me stop you for a moment, because, you know, one thing is to give the numbers Amitabh Behar as Oxfam does, and we can argue over those numbers, they will be disputable, but the solutions you offer, tax the super rich. Now many will say that's the worst thing that you can do. In fact, across the world people are saying have lower, more rational taxation across the board. So taxing the super rich, is that the only solution that you all are offering at the moment?
So, Rajdeep, if you look at our report, we are offering at least 3 very, very concrete suggestions and recommendations. But we also believe that taxing the super rich is one of the solutions. We do need a wealth tax, and wealth tax is something not alien. You have wealth tax actually in countries like Spain, Switzerland, and Norway. Let me also say that a lot of Latin American countries, Costa Rica, Bolivia, are now thinking of introducing a wealth tax, and we also had that. So I think, you know, it's given the concentration of wealth at the top, it is not something which is outrageous as a lot of people believe. I would actually say that, you know, we just get so disturbed by this idea of a wealth tax or a windfall profit tax. We do not look at what's happening to the significant number of poor people in this country.
Let me just take that to Nilesh Shah, because let me take that to Nilesh Shah, because the government in 2019 gave corporate India a lot of tax breaks that was seen to be contentious. Do you believe that taxing the super rich, we have a budget coming up in 2 weeks, is really the answer?
So Rajdeep, we did experiment with estate duty and wealth tax and income tax. There was a time where in India, on 100 rupee income, you paid 102 rupees and 50 paisa of tax. What did that create? It created an economy which led the global economy. In 1947, India was ahead of Japan in per capita GDP. In 1960, India was ahead of South Korea in per capita GDP. In 1980, India was ahead of China in per capita GDP. Today, all these countries are way ahead of us. What we need is fair distribution of tax compliance. Today, salaried class is the probably only honest taxpayer category in the country. There are many businessmen who are rich, but they are not paying their fair share of tax. If we can improve tax compliance, probably we'll be able to raise resources which are needed for providing support to the bottom of the pyramid.
So many
we are geographically situated. Just 1 minute. We are geographically situated in Asia, but in terms of mentality, we are situated in Africa. Our tax to GDP ratio is more comparable to African nations than Asian nations. We have to improve tax compliance so that we can justifiably say we are an Asian country.
You know, Arun Kumar, there will be those who have often said, just allow the economy to grow. A faster growing economy will eventually result in those in the bottom of the pyramid benefiting. More than 200 million Indians were reportedly, according to UN figures, lifted out of poverty post 2005 right up to 2016. So faster growth rate, 7%, 8%, will eventually result, as we become now the 5th largest economy with dreams of becoming 2nd largest in 25 years. Many of these inequalities will reduce because more people will have access to income.
So, Rajdeep, the problem really is that by cutting direct taxes, you don't raise investment, and if you don't raise investment, growth does not pick up. So in 2019, when we sharply cut the corporate tax rate, it did not lead to greater investment, it led to the debt being reduced by the companies, because you need demand, and without demand companies are not going to invest. Our capacity utilization has been hovering between 70 and 75. And why is that? Because people at the lower level do not have the purchasing power to purchase goods and services. So in fact, industry itself has been saying that we need to actually pump in purchasing power into the rural areas, towards the poor. And let me also remind you that Warren Buffett has been saying that the rich have to pay more taxes, otherwise capitalism would not survive. He said that in 2012, and he was supported by the Italian rich, the French rich, the German rich, and many of the American rich. So in other words, you see this disparity in wealth and income that is there is leading to demand shortage the world over, and therefore the World Bank has also changed its line. The World Bank is now saying we need universal basic income. That means large number of people who are not getting jobs, they need to have purchasing power in hand. So in other words, demand side policies are needed much more than actually giving concessions to the well-off. Then the pie would grow. So you're right that the pie needs to grow, but the pie needs to grow evenly. What's happening is pie is growing unevenly and creating a crisis of capitalism, and that's why even in the US, Trump was saying, bring capital back to the US. Because from Mexico, from China, he's blaming India that, capital is going there, etc. So they were also trying to increase their investment by bringing their capital back. In India, we need to increase our capital investment, because it peaked in 2012-13 at 35.5% and came down to 30%. So why is that happening? Because demand is inadequate, and demand will be inadequate if there is inequality. Then at the lower levels purchasing power is inadequate, and that's why the problem is there. So therefore, we must reduce our indirect taxes and raise direct taxes, because indirect taxes are regressive, they fall on the poor people, as this report points out. However, there's an error in the report in terms of what indirect taxes are paid by different segments, but the sense is correct, that reduce indirect taxes, raise direct taxes, and through that the economy will grow much faster.
Okay, let me leave it there. I think we've heard different perspectives, but I think the bottom line is very clear. This is an issue that will continue in a way to plague our country. We need to find ways, while wealth grows, to ensure a more even distribution, if possible, of wealth, and at least a better standard of living for those at the bottom of the pyramid. Amitabh Bayar, Nilesh Shah, Dr. Arun Kumar, appreciate your joining me on our top talking point tonight.